YouTube, what's happening? This is Gary from Lads, and today we're going to do a walkthrough of our remix for Rasi Z's Zamin. The key of the track is in D minor, and the tempo is 118 beats per minute. The links to the full track for purchase and for streaming will be in the link below. And yeah, let's get straight into it. So basically, we have a kick channel, which we've duplicated. So we have a sidechain channel as well. And the kick on its own sounds like this. All right, fairly straightforward. We have a EQ8 on it with a low cut, a boost at its fundamental frequency, and then a drop or a cut at 137 hertz, 3 dB. And that is just to get rid of some mud and some like a wooden tone in the kick that I didn't like. Right, moving on, we've got the percussions. On the percussion group or the percussion bus, we've got the API 2500 from Waves, and this is just used to glue the percussions together, and a Ableton compressor which just catches the peaks before they hit the API. And collectively, the percussion group sounds like this. Then later on in the arrangement, we add in this triangle and clave sound. And that just basically helps to progress the drum arrangement throughout the track. A couple of key points to have a listen to here. This main tom sounds like this. And what we did is we ran that through the machine from Native Instruments and added the grain delay and the beat delay. And what we did with that is we basically ran it through the 16th and 32nd grid of the delays in the stretch, and we used it to create these textures. And basically that just helps to keep the drum arrangement more interesting and kind of give you a little bit more ear candy throughout the rest of the track. Another thing which I really liked was that we took the original percussion, which sounds like this, and we cut it up and used it in our own little way throughout the track. So not much else that's of great importance or interest in the percussion. It's fairly straightforward with a couple of low toms and low kicks to just add to the groove. And then we move on to the claps. So the claps has got two layers to it. It's got a cowbell and a snap or click sound. The click sound or the snap sounds sound like this. And that just comes straight out of the machine. And then we felt that it needed something a little bit more, not organic, but a little bit more punchy that'll cut through the mix. So we added in this cowbell, and the cowbell comes straight out of a Contact drum kit. It's an orchestral drum kit, and we added this transient master onto it. So without the transient master, the cowbell sounds like this. Now if you listen to that, it's got this long kind of sustained sound to it and not very much attack. So what we did with Native Instruments transient master is to just up the attack and decrease the sustain and really bring out the actual attack portion of the sound. And it makes it a lot more bitey, a lot more choppy, and punches through the mix a little bit more. And then they are group processed with an API, which is probably my favorite compressor for grouping percussion and hat sounds together. Then we move on to the hat group. The hat group consists of 5 layers, which is basically a ride, a shaker, another shaker, and then 2 hats on the space between the kicks. The off shaker and the hat sounds like this together. bring in the ride cymbal. And then we have this shaker. And then a straight 16 note shaker. Right, then on the main groove shaker, we have a couple of interesting processing tips here. Number one, we added this flanger to just give it a little bit more movement and interest, along with a plate to put it into a room, sidechain to the kick, and then an auto pan to move it left and right. And then we have the 16th note shaker, and we've added this erosion to it. Now, without the erosion, if I play this, it's got a super clean sound, and I wanted it to have a bit of grit and a bit of dirt to it, so I added this erosion into it. Kind of blends a white noise into it, and it gives it a bit more crunch, and you end up with that. So combined with a bit of chorus, and that makes up for a nice 16th note hi-hat pattern and sound. So moving on, we then have the bass line, of which it plays these MIDI notes. It starts on the root, goes up the octave to the fifth, or the dominant, should you say, which is the fifth of the D minor scale. There we go to the G, and then to the A sharp. And there's one part in the track where the bass actually doesn't start on the root, but starts on the dominant itself, and that just helps to switch up the vibe a little bit. It gives it almost like a modulation to another key kind of sound, even though it's technically not. And the sound comes straight out of Arturia's Mini V, which is like the Minimoog emulation from Arturia. And the bass sounds like this. Alright, now you'll notice all these little squiggly lines here, and that is pretty much my automation of a utility gain that I placed on this. Because of the high dynamic range that this bass had, so the highs were very high and the lows were very low. I wanted to kind of even that out. Now, because of the big difference in the volumes of it, I didn't want to run this through a compressor, because it would hit the compressor really hard and you would hear that compression. So what I've opted to do is manually, with the utility gain, decrease and increase the volume to get a more smoother effect. So essentially the utility gain formed its own compressor. I've then added a limiter right after that, just to catch the highest peaks, and then sidechained it to the kick. Then we move on to the synths. The synths, I'm going to brush over real quick. We've got this pad sound, which sounds like this. You'll actually notice the pitch bend right at the end of the bar, and that gives it an eerie kind of feeling. And what I did is I combined it with this riser sound, and together they sound like this. So there you actually notice the riser pitching down and up. And this gives the track a very mysterious, eerie kind of vibe. And then underneath that, we added a piano, which is an Omnisphere preset. And these are the chords that it played. And together those three sounds sound like this. So essentially those three sounds, along with the vocals, which I'll get to later, form the chord progression backbone of the track, right? Then on top of that, we've got these high bass, we called it, because it was actually a bass sound which was just pitched up higher. You'll recognize this in the track because it stands out quite loud in the mix, but it's actually a high bass sound. It's the prog rock preset from the Monarch in Reactor 6. And what we did was just automated the LFO, and it sounds something like this. Yeah, so that'll give you the idea of where that came from. Then moving on to our plucky synths down here, we've got the main one, which you'll recognize is this violin, which sounds like this. And then we have a counter melody playing underneath that. And the interesting thing is that those are actually the same preset. The high pluck is just playing an octave higher, and the violin just keeps that same motive going on throughout the track. It's almost like the chorus of the track, if you will. And those two are very catchy melodies that kind of stick out throughout the track. And then at the bottom here, we've got these fast plucks, which help to form almost like a bridge section, but it's just underlying, kind of just providing an extra ear candy to the track. And those are just playing the root and the dominant, and they're just alternating in the mix like that, just subtly in the background. And then of course the last thing we need to speak of in terms of the melodic elements of the track is the duduk, which is from the actual original stem of Zamin, and that sounds like this. So essentially the track was built around that. That was the main sound that we wanted to kind of emphasize. We did a couple of interesting different arrangements on it, and also reversed some of the sections towards the end of the bars to kind of just create a sweep to go into the next section. And this part works really, really well on the dance floor. We've had great players around the world with this track, and we just got great feedback from it. Then with the voices, we used the main vocal, which was chopped up into parts that we liked, and this is just used inside of the break, and it sounds something like this. And then that vocal basically just leads into the drop of the second main section before the flute comes in. And then underneath that we have a melody which we actually built out of the vocal. I think the original vocal shot is this one here. And then what we did is, if I double click on this at the bottom left here, this note's transposed -2 semitones, this one's -3, that one's -5. So essentially this vocal rides along with the melody of the piano. So if I play the piano and the vocal together, you get something like this. So those two are very complementary of each other. And really form the chord progression backbone of the track. And then towards the bottom, we've got our one-shots, which are basically just white noises and little ear candy pieces throughout the track, just to provide some interest for the duration of the full arrangement. And then right at the bottom, because the track is organic, we wanted to make it feel even more so. And a good way of doing this is to actually add in field recordings. So this is one that's actually children playing on a playground. And just adding that super low in the mix just brings it out so much. And that is layered with this more metallic sounding one. I'll have to bring up the volume for this so that you can hear it. but it sounds like kind of metal sheets scraping against each other. So yeah, those two play really, really low in the mix, and they're just there to kind of place the track in an environment. On the master, I've got absolutely zero processing. Usually what we would do is put out analyzers and visual tools, and then sometimes we'll put in a compressor and some EQ if we feel we need to do some boosts and or cuts in certain areas. But for the rest, that was pretty much it. Zamin was done really, really quickly. It is very little in terms of processing after the sounds were selected. I think the most important part was that the melodies were good and that the sound selection was good, and that's kind of what made the track. It was also thanks to Rasi Z, who produced a fantastic original for us to actually work something off of. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, please feel free to let me know in the comments below what it is that you'd like to see, maybe more of content of further tracks of ours, and perhaps tips and tricks on certain techniques that we use. And yeah, feel free to connect with us on SoundCloud and Instagram. Just search Lads Music, and yeah, I'll leave the link to the full length track below for Spotify and for SoundCloud and Beatport. And any supports regarding this track would be greatly appreciated. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon. Peace.